The readings this morning begin with a death. It's the death of King Solomon. And then we move on to hearing from Solomon. Then David slept with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David. Only he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil, for who can govern this your great people?" It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked for this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this and had not asked for yourself long life or riches or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life." And then from the indigenous translation of the New Testament, the First Nations version, from Ephesians 5:15 to 20. "Walk with your eyes wide open and make wise use of your time, for the evil days we live in are full of worthless and troubled ways. Keep foolishness far from you and walk in the ways of wisdom, for then you will clearly see the path Creator has chosen for you. It is not wise to become a drunk, for it will lead you to a life of emptiness and sorrow. Instead, drink deeply of Creator's Spirit, and he will lead you into a life of beauty and harmony. At your gatherings, tell the ancient stories and sing the traditional songs. Sing spiritual songs from your heart as you dance before the Great Spirit, giving thanks to our Father, the Creator, as you represent our honored chief. Creator sets free, that is Jesus, the chosen one."
Thank you, Michael. I thought today, I don't know if you all have been reading Ephesians. Have you been reading it as you go along? No? Okay. So over these past few weeks, we've been reading from Ephesians 4 and 5, and I'd like to do a little bit from each one because it leads up to this walking in the way of wisdom. So I was a little taken aback about wisdom, because I may be like some of you, where I don't think of myself as being wise or having any great pearls of wisdom to cast before the world. So it's a little intimidating to think, oh, I'm supposed to be walking in the way of wisdom. But I think we have found here ways that we can understand that and break it down. First, let's just look briefly at the story of David, the traditional stories, right? It's one of our great traditional stories for our religious life of King David and the one who danced before God. Remember that? And I loved how in Ephesians it's also you dance before God, because we know native dance is very much an important part of their spiritual ceremonies. So that is brought in. It's just an example of how many of the different pieces of this translation relate back to the lens of native people who are people of Christian faith. So we hear that David's end of his life and his child Solomon, and I bet some of you have had kids, and I see some, we know we have families, I bet we have some adults here who have kids or kids that they've been responsible for. And isn't it hard to imagine a young child suddenly becoming king? And he says, I'm a little child and I don't even know how to go out or how to come in. I love that because, you can imagine, oh gosh, I'm in a temple and a palace, and how do I go out and where do I come in? So a child who is at sea as to how he is supposed to function. And he also is with a great people, and a lot of people. So he has a big kingdom that he's supposed to be governing. And so he has the wisdom already to ask when God asks him in a dream, which is also wonderful. We have lots of dreams in the Old Testament. We have a few in the New Testament too, but lots of them in the Old Testament. And dream and vision is so much part of the native experience of spiritual life that it's nice that we also have a dream in Kings. But in the dream, God says, what can I give you? And it made me think of the genie in the bottle, like you have one wish, and you can't imagine what in the world you would wish for. But Solomon seems to come pretty quickly to realizing maybe it's because he's intimidated by what he's supposed to do in his father's stead as king, but he wishes for an understanding mind. I want you to keep that in mind for you, because that's a key to how you would walk the path of wisdom, is that you have an understanding mind. And then the second part is just as important, a discerning of good and evil. In other words, a person who can also determine, what's good. And I'm a little hesitant around evil, just because it carries a lot of baggage, and I'm not quite sure what evil is. Don't ask me, because I couldn't tell you. But we certainly know the difference between good and bad. We know that there are good things to do and there are bad things. So the discernment is just critical. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how many degrees you have, how wealthy you are. If you don't know how to discern between what is good and what is bad, you're not going to live a very fruitful life. And so Solomon asks for those two things, and God is of course pleased. He gives him lots of good things. So, and we know that that's the thing we know, the wisdom of Solomon. He says that your whole life and you'll be famous. Well, here we are in the 21st century, and we still know somebody who says the wisdom of Solomon. We know what that is. So I find that very interesting and a nice pairing with Paul's letter to the Ephesians about how to live a life walking with wisdom. So Paul is writing this letter to the Ephesians. He founded this church, and it's a church where there are both Gentiles, in other words, anybody who's not Jewish, and who have converted to Christianity, because we're still looking at the first century after Jesus' death, and also converted Jews. So in other words, Jews who have decided, I do believe in Jesus. I think he is the Messiah, the one we've been waiting for, so I want to be a Christian too. So in a sense, they're both two different types, but they're both people learning a new religion. And so Paul is writing to them to help teach them. So we've been reading different teachings, really, about what is this life like. Now, one of the things in the Ephesians translation, not that you read, but what earlier, I love this. It says that because we have matured, let's see, is that the right one? No, up here. Oh, here. Verse 22, take off the stained and worn out outfit that you are currently wearing, and your selfish desires and worthless ways of thinking. Put on the regalia of your new life. You have been made new. And doesn't that somehow make it real? That people were really having to be changed. And I think we've kind of lost that sense now, because many of us come into church having from our families, or we all come to church for different reasons. Many of us have a history of difficulties in life where we find refuge and we find support and we find love in a church setting. But other people have, very difficult times. And like in the recovery movement, I always think of them, which I have such admiration for, where helping people overcome addictions and using the higher power or God to help them put on a new life, right? A new self. They are new people. So we have that image too, like in baptism or confirmation, but still I think it gets kind of lost. I'm not sure I feel all that new, so I'm kind of assuming that maybe I'm not the only one. But I like the idea of putting on new regalia so that I can walk wisely. So let me give you just briefly in the previous parts of how Paul describes what he calls, and this is again in the First Nations version, the path of love. That's the path that we're walking on. It's the path that Jesus has laid out for us, the path of love. So some of it is, one, walk with humble and gentle spirits. So humility and gentleness, that's a part of who it is for this mature person that you now are in this new life. Secondly, patiently showing love and respect to others. That's another, what it would look like, how you would be behaving. You're behaving with respect and patience. Isn't that a nice one? I bet all of us could use reminding ourselves to be patient about things. And number three, that you walk in peace. Very important that you walk in peace. And there's also, and harmony. They really go together, I think. And he has a segment there of that part about putting anger behind you. Don't let the sun set on your anger. And they have a great translation of that in which they talk about anger, which does need to be stopped in its tracks, because it can, if not, it can molder and become a wildfire of rage. And we know about wildfires, and we know how fast they can ignite, right? So you don't want to have that happening to you. So if you feel anger about anything, a person, an event, whatever it is, it's best to deal with it early days before it has an opportunity to become a wildfire of rage, which will ruin your life, which is what Paul says. And he also points out that this is another piece that I really like, that we will no longer be listening to the ones who behave like tricksters with their forked tongues. And I bet you might think of some of those folks in our public life, if not our personal lives. And he says you're not going to pay attention to them because you have matured. You have grown from being a child who is just kind of tossed by the waves and just pulled by any kind of thinking. And you know how that can happen, right? The last person that says, oh, I want a taco, and you hadn't even thought about having a taco, and then you go, oh, taco. But so it can happen in a harmless way, but it can happen in big ways too. And so when you are following the path of Jesus, the path of love, you are a mature human being who knows how to balance everything. So I do want to just, before I end, would like to just point out in the reading itself that you have in your bulletin. The one that continues to talk to me is walk with eyes wide open. Now I love that because I think I can certainly say for myself, maybe others, that we can be tempted to put our heads in the sand about things, or just not see what's right in front of us. And in fact, someone else might say, well, didn't you see that coming? And have anybody had that experience where you kind of like, well, no, but then you should have seen it coming, and you did it. Or you, for me, it happens often if I'm afraid, or something that feels like it's going to be overwhelming, that I won't be able to deal with it. Then I kind of put it aside and don't want to look at that one, you know. I'll look at these other things that I can do something about. But here Paul is saying to us, we have to keep our eyes wide open. And that's so we can have all the information that we need to live a good life, or to make good decisions. That's also because we live in days that are where they're full of worthless and troubled ways. Well, we probably all could say that is certainly the truth. That 2,000 years ago, and sadly still today. It is not wise to become a drunk. Now, I think this is just my speculation, that he's using that, or they are using that term in the translation, because I'm sure many of you know that alcohol became a real addiction and problem for many Native American communities. And many of their families and people were destroyed by alcohol, sadly brought to them by the white settlers. But it really could be any kind of addiction, I think. I don't think it means just alcohol. I think it means anything that you can't let go, or that you just feel pulled into and you can't get out of. Don't let that happen to you, because it will lead you to a life of emptiness and sorrow. Now, I love that because it's not judgmental, is it? It's not saying you're a bad person. It's just saying you're going to go on a path that's going to lead to bad things happening, to sorrowfulness and to emptiness. So then in the end, it says, sing the traditional songs. Well, we're singing new traditional songs, right? I love the ones we've been singing. Because it doesn't have to be the old 18th century or 19th century ones. It can be our new traditions of our music. And so singing those songs together builds up our spirits and our lives. And your songs, and listening to the stories, and honoring our traditions. I think all of that are important parts that Paul is trying to let us know is what it will feel like, what it would look like to be walking this way on this path of love. And I'm so grateful to be here with all of you, new people to me, except one or two, and to share, to know that I'm on that path with all of you. So thanks be to God.